Welcome to Investments. I'm Professor Eng-Xiang Yang. Today, we'll discuss Chapter 17, Macroeconomic and Industry Analysis. We will focus on Section 17.4 on investment news related to the economy. Before we begin, you might be interested in asking yourself a few questions. First, what are investment news related to the economy? Second, why is it necessary to read investment news related to the economy? Third, how do I obtain investment news related to the economy? If you're interested in investing on a specific company, how about let's start with the basics of investment news related to the economy. First, what are investment news related to the economy? Governments often make regular or irregular announcements through news media or the press as a way to inform the general public on any new or updated information relating to the nation. For economic news, governments also ensure a smooth delivery of information to the public through various phases of news announcements. Some examples of economic news would include the announcement of new interest rates, inflation rates, unemployment rates, or GDP. Governments provide economic estimations and outlook to the public to inform people on the likely future prospect of tomorrow's economy. Important government decisions which might influence economic well-being of households or individuals will also be announced, such as tax regulations. Second, why is it necessary to read investment news related to the economy? The purpose of reading investment news related to the economy is to establish fundamental knowledge on economy and its overall outlook for the future to assist in investment decision making. In order to comprehend investment news related to the economy, investors need to understand the demand and supply of an economic system, identify sources of demand and supply shock, and analyze government policies and remedies toward demand and supply shock. Therefore, economic news is often related to a series of chain reaction of the domestic and international economy on how one country's economic policy may affect another, or how domestic economic policy may affect the local market or foreign investors. With some knowledge on economic news, investors can also plan on allocating wealth in different financial markets for investment diversification and risk reduction. Investors can also plan for different investment projects which can overcome the downturn of economic cycle and profit from booming of economic cycle. Third, how do I obtain investment news related to the economy? One of the most common ways for investors to obtain investment news related to the economy is through major newspapers. Like we mentioned in previous section on investment news related to corporations, newspapers would also be a good source of economic news. Some of the well-known international business newspapers include the Wall Street Journal, Barron's, and Financial Times. In Taiwan, the most well-recognized business newspapers include the Economic Daily News, Commercial Times, and United Daily News. Government agency websites are also reliable sources of economic news and policies. Now, let's take a look at slide 17-1. Right. So here we'll be focusing on investment news related to the economy. Okay. So let's take a look. All right. The first article that we have will be on the fiscal policy and the fiscal cliff. Okay. Right. So the so-called fiscal cliff crisis at the end of 2012 came close being an unintended experiment in extreme fiscal policy. The seed of the crisis was planted in August 2011 when Congress, until then unable to agree on an expansion of the federal debt ceiling, passed an interim compromise. The federal debt ceiling will be allowed to rise, but with a provision on that Congress would, by the end of 2012, pass legislation reducing the federal budget deficit by 1.2 trillion per 10 years. A bipartisan super committee will be formed to propose a package of tax increases and spending reductions. If no agreement were reached, 2013 tax prices will be split equally between domestic and defense programs. This compromise was intended to create a sword of Damocles to hang over Congress' head, ensuring that it would be forced to arrive at a legislative compromise. If not, then the resulting contradictory fiscal policy entailing both steep spending cuts and dramatic tax increases was widely regarded as a sure to lead to another recession. The Congressional Budget Office estimated that the threatened tax increases and spending reduction would act to reduce GDP growth in 2013 from around 1.7% to negative 0.5%, and increase the unemployment rate by more than a percentage point. This was the fiscal cliff Congress risks jumping from. Right, so from here we notice that there is actually a very important fiscal policy that's actually being developed and also being discussed, okay? And they also mentioned about the timeline on how the new fiscal policy will be administered or taken place, okay? And also some of the controversies, the downside effect, okay? And the most obvious downside effect is that increases in taxes will cause another recession. And this wasn't the purpose of a fiscal policy, okay? Because we're focusing on the economic development, and since the economy wasn't doing well, okay, some remedies should be provided and some policies should be reformulated, okay? But in a way that it will have the least effect to the public and try to ensure a good economic development in the positive side, okay? Rather than causing threats or panic in the public. Right, so in the end, Congress narrowly avoided jumping by and acting yet another stopgap compromise. It delayed sequestration, okay, by 2 months, allowing budgetary negotiations to continue. And it paid for the cost of that delay by raising some tax rates, including those on capital gains and household income above $450,000. But the fiscal fight is far from over. The tax increases agreed to at the end of 2012 were far from enough to meet the original target of a 1.2 trillion reduction in the 10-year deficit. Spending cut discussions are still continuous, and the government will pump up against the new debt ceiling in early 2013. The fiscal debate continues unabated. Okay, so there's really no good solution. Okay, to on the economic development. Okay, but what we have learned is that there's a delay by 2 months. Okay, the negotiation for the budget still continues. Okay, but the thing is, capital gains taxes were actually increased, and household incomes, okay, with over 450,000 will also be charged with increases in taxes, okay? So we see that, there might be some solutions, some remedies, but it might not be the most appropriate or the best, okay? And we don't know how this is going to be in the short term or in the long term, okay? Right. So this is what we have.